Hey everyone, it's PoE Affliction, and today we're going to be talking about how to craft every single item for a strength stacker that you might care about. Now, in this guide, we are going to talk about every single variation of every single item for both a budget setup and a high-end setup. The only thing we will not be talking about in this setup is going to be how to craft yourself a triple or a quadruple influence helmet, as in my opinion, I feel like that is way out of most people's budgets. But other than that, we'll cover every single other item that is relevant for this build. So why don't we first start talking about the helmet? So there's going to be two variations of the helmet. One is going to be on a lion pelt, and then the other is going to be on a blizzard crown. But in terms of crafting, the methodology is literally the same for both of them. So simply just pick which base makes sense for you. If you are not playing this build with Original Sin and you can't afford Original Sin yet, you should be using a lion's pelt. If you do have an Original Sin, instead of crafting this on a lion's pelt, you should be crafting this on a blizzard crown, because we can then take the added cold damage from a blizzard crown and use it with Original Sin. I'm going to use a lion pelt here as an example, but again, if you have an Original Sin and you're making a blizzard crown, the crafting process is exactly the same. So what we want to do here is we want to get ourselves an item level 82 lion pelt or blizzard crown with warlord influence specifically on it. Now what you could do is, if this doesn't have any influence, is you could just use a warlord's exalted orb on any random lion pelt to make it warlord and simply just start the craft from there. Now the first step is going to be very simple. All we want to do is use deafening essences of rage to guarantee a strength roll on our helmet and roll like this until we hit the gain accuracy rating equal to your strength roll. Now this is going to be a 1 in 94 chance on average, but we need to get it with a open suffix. So what we would do is we would just sit here and just spam a bunch of strength essences until we get ourselves the essence roll, the accuracy rating equivalent to your strength roll. And if we were to potentially get ourselves a third suffix on here, you would have to annul the helmet until you specifically remove the third suffix. But no matter what, you need to get yourself an open prefix and an open suffix, and there's nothing we could do to influence this. You simply just need to annul if the helmet is full in one of the two. So once you have yourself a helmet that has only strength and accuracy rating equal to your strength as your two suffixes, what we're going to do is, with our open prefix, we are going to go to the bench and we are going to craft ourselves suffixes cannot be changed. We are then going to take the helmet and we are going to bring it to the crafting bench, and we are going to specifically use Reforge Crit. This will guarantee crit multi as a suffix onto our helmet, because crit multi is specifically a warlord mod and it's the only mod with a crit tag on it. Then what we want to do from here is we are going to want to use an Orb of Dominance. What this is going to do is it's going to upgrade one of the Warlord mods that we have on the helmet and downgrade the other one. And what we want here is to win the 50-50 and upgrade the accuracy rating equal to your strength to elevated while downgrading the crit multi. So for example, if we were to lose this like this and get ourselves crit multi, what we would do is we would start over again and spam strength essences until we get ourselves a helmet that has accuracy rating on it, put suffixes cannot be changed, and do the whole process over again. And we need to do this until we win the 50-50 and the crit multi gets downgraded and the accuracy rating becomes elevated accuracy rating. The reason behind this is we really need the elevated mod, which is going to also give us 1% crit chance per 10 strength. Once we have a helmet that looks like this, all we're going to do is finish up the craft. So from here, we are going to put suffixes cannot be changed back on the helmet, assuming you have an open prefix. If you don't, you are going to have to annul a prefix off. And this part, in my opinion, is really important, as it's going to make us lose 2 of the 3 mods that we actually care about the helmet if you don't do this. And one thing to mention here is you want to try this annul before you actually elevate, because if you were to elevate and then annul, you would just lose the price of a Orb of Dominance. But as soon as we do get ourselves a helmet with an open prefix, the craft suffix cannot be changed back on it, we are then going to go over to the harvest bench and do Reforge Crit one more time to put a crit multi roll back on here. Now you're either going to get tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, and there's nothing you could really do to influence this. You're just going to hope they get yourself a high crit multi roll. Finally, what you're going to do is, if you have an open prefix, you're going to take this helmet over to the crafting bench and you're simply just going to craft physical damage taken as fire. Now, it's okay if this helmet doesn't have life on it or any other useful prefixes. It's really difficult to make this helmet any better. What you could do, if you really want to try and make this better, is instead of putting physical taken as fire, is to instead put suffixes cannot be changed and then scour the helmet so you have open prefixes. And then all you're going to have to do is craft mana onto the helmet. Any of the mana rolls work, and then hit it with 2 exalted orbs, fishing for tier 1 life. What you would then do from this point is then you would swap over the crafted mana for suffixes cannot be changed, scour, craft mana back onto the helmet, and keep doing this until you hit mods that you're happy with. It won't be a very high chance to hit life, but if you do want to get life on this helmet, this is how you'd get life on the helmet. And then whenever you're done with this, or if you don't want to go through this process, you would simply just craft physical damage taken as fire to finish up the helmet. Moving on next, let's talk about how you'd craft a cheap ring for this build. So a ring for this build will be very simple. The cheap one is simply going to be Fractured Chaos Resistance with a critical strike multiplier essence on it, a tier 1 strength roll, and then a high life roll with a non-channeling roll on it. Now, ideally, you'd want to buy yourself an amethyst ring with fractured chaos resistance on it, but these are very, very expensive. You could opt to look for fractured tier 2 chaos resistance, or you could opt to look for fractured tier 1 on a different base. It's up to you, but no matter what, we want to get ourselves a fractured chaos resistance ring. And we do want to make sure that the item level is 82 or higher, as that is the minimum requirement to roll tier 1 strength. And then what we're going to want to do for this ring is we're going to be wanting to spam scorn essences, and you can use shrieking if deafening is a little bit too expensive, until we hit tier 1 strength. Now, with a fractured chaos resistance roll on the ring, it's going to be a 1 in 124, so it'll be a little bit costly, but as soon as you finish the step, you will pretty much be done with the ring for the most part. So in the end, what we're going to have is a ring that looks something like this. We're going to have tier 1 strength on it. We're going to have our fractured chaos resistance roll, and then we're going to have the essence critical strike multiplier roll as our last suffix. Now, from this point, if you don't get an open prefix, you will have to annul a prefix off if you end up getting a bunch of junk prefixes that look something like this. Once you annul a prefix, if you do have full prefixes, which is very rare for this to actually happen, what you can then do is you can go over to the bench and craft suffixes cannot be changed, and then scour the ring to remove all the suffixes and have a clean ring. From this point, it's going to be up to you what you want to do. What we can do from this point is we can craft mana onto our ring and then double X slam the ring to try and fish for a high life roll. This is around a 1 in 20 chance to hit tier 3 life or higher, and you can do this as many times as you'd like to attempt to fish for a high life roll. But after we would slam twice, we would simply remove the crafted mana roll off of our ring, and we would instead put suffixes cannot be changed and scour the ring, allowing us to keep trying this over and over by crafting mana again to block as many of the mods as we can, and then double X slamming until we hit something. If you don't want to do this, you can skip this step completely, but once you have a life roll that you're happy with, all you would do is swap out the crafted mana roll for non-channeling roll, and you would have yourself a completed ring. Up next, we are going to talk about the synthesis version of this ring, which is going to use a 6% increased strength base as our base, which means we cannot use a fractured mod. Now, this is going to be substantially more expensive, especially if you want yourself a good chaos resistance roll on it. So that part is going to be up to you. So once again, we are going to take a ring. I'm going to use a gold ring here as an example. The implicit doesn't matter because it would have the strength implicit on it. But once again, we want to find ourselves an item level 82 or higher ring to be able to roll tier 1 strength. And it's going to be the same exact setup as the previous ring, except this time we don't have a fractured mod. So it'll be a 1 in 60 chance to see tier 1 strength. Now, the thing about this is you are going to need clean suffixes. So in the end, we might have a ring that looks something like this, where you have yourself tier 1 strength, where you have yourself the essence crit multi, and you have yourself some random junk suffix. You will have to annul this suffix off of the ring in some sort of way, and you will also need an open prefix if you don't have an open prefix. So you need to get yourself a ring that has only tier 1 strength and crit as your 2 suffixes and 1 open prefix. So this might take you a few annuls to be able to get yourself to this point. Once we have ourselves a ring that has T1 strength and the essence crit multi-roll on it, we're going to go over to the crafting bench, and we are going to put suffixes cannot be changed onto the ring. We are then going to take this over to the harvest bench, and we are going to augment chaos, which is going to guarantee give us a chaos resistance roll. Now, there are 6 tiers of chaos resistance, and all of them are weighted equally, so you have just as high of an odds to get tier 6 chaos resistance as you do for tier 1 chaos resistance. So when we do this, we are going to get a random chaos res, and this part is going to be up to you. If you want to go for specifically tier 1 chaos resistance, it's going to be very expensive as you need to win a 1 in 6. Honestly, in my opinion, I would just settle for tier 3 or higher chaos res, but if you don't have the money to recraft this a bunch of times, if you fail this and get a low chaos res roll, you can just stick with whatever you get. But if you do want to change this, what you would do is you would have to, from this point, attempt to annul the chaos res off. If you were to annul the strength or the crit multi instead, you would have to start over from scratch by spamming more crit multi essences onto the ring until you get yourself a ring that has specifically just tier 1 strength and crit multi as your suffixes, and then you go over to the bench again with suffixes cannot be changed and try again. But if you do manage to specifically annul off the chaos res and you have yourself the same ring again, you simply can just put suffixes cannot be changed, go to the bench, and augment chaos again for a new roll. This part is very expensive, so I would not recommend to do this too many times unless you're making yourself a very, very high-end ring. But that part is just simply down to you and whatever your budget level currently is. Once you have a ring like this, all we're going to do is we are going to take it to the bench, we are going to put suffixes cannot be changed, and we are going to scour the ring if we have a ring that has a bunch of random prefixes on it. This is going to give us a clean ring with no other prefixes. And from this point, all we need to do is simply fish for a high life roll. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take the ring and craft mana on it, as this will block quite a lot of the mods. And then we are just simply going to use 2 exalted orbs on the ring. And we have a 1 in 20 chance to get ourselves a tier 3 or higher roll. If you don't end up hitting life on your exalted slam, all you would do is you would then change your mana craft for suffixes cannot be changed and scour the ring to get yourself clean prefixes again. And we would just simply repeat this process of crafting mana onto the ring and X-slamming until we get a desired outcome. Once you're happy with whatever tier of life you get, and I wouldn't be too picky about this, I would settle for tier 3 life or higher. All we have to do to finish up the ring is simply just craft non-channeling skills on it, and we have ourselves a synthesized ring or a strength stacker. Up next, let's talk about how to make the gloves for this build. So these gloves are going to be very simple. We're either going to want to look for fractured spell suppression or fractured attack speed, and then use strength essences to fish for the other suffix that we're missing. We are then going to end the craft by using Eldritch Chaos Orbs to fish for good prefixes, and then finish off by crafting the last prefix that we're missing. The difficult part about these gloves is going to be the Eldritch implicits themselves, as we do need to get perfect spell suppression onto these gloves. So to start off, we are going to need to get ourselves an item level 85 pair of Slink gloves. Now, you have 2 options here. You can either look for fractured tier 1 spell suppression, and if you're looking for fractured tier 1 spell suppression, it specifically has to be 14%. No other roll but 14% will be enough to get you spell suppression cap. What you can instead do is, if this is too expensive, instead of looking for fractured spell suppression, is to look for fractured attack speed instead. These should be a lot cheaper for a item level 85 pair of gloves. Now, ideally, you're going to want to get yourself fractured spell suppression instead of fractured attack speed, as rolling for attack speed is a little bit harder than rolling for spell suppression, but fractured attack speed gloves are going to be cheaper. You're going to have to look at the price of both the fractures, and if fractured spell suppression is worth 5, 6, 7 more div than fractured attack speed, then you should just go for fractured attack speed, as you will save more money doing that. But if we want to quickly look at what we're going to be doing, if we want to start with fractured spell suppression and roll for attack speed using deafening rage essences, it's a 1 in 160 chance. If we want to look at the chance of us rolling for tier 1 spell suppression, it's only a 1 in 83 chance, effectively halving the total cost of essences. In the end, no matter what, you are going to end up with a pair of gloves that look something like this. You're going to have tier 1 attack speed and spell suppression, and one of these 2 is going to be fractured, and then you're going to have the essence strength roll on it. Now, if you roll for spell suppression like this and it ends up rolling 13%, not 14%, I would recommend to just go and divine it now, so it is 14%. And then from here, we can finish the rest of the craft. Now, what we want to do is we would want to influence these gloves with a Ember, so they have Searing Exarch influence on them. And then we're just simply going to be using Eldritch Chaos Orbs to spam roll our gloves until we hit something half decent. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to substitute these Chaos Orbs with Exalted Orbs if we specifically only end up rolling 1 roll. What we are trying to aim for here is tier 2 or higher percent evasion rating, flat evasion rating, and life. So if this, for example, instead of it being tier 3 evasion rating, ended up being tier 2 evasion rating by itself like this, we can then use an Eldritch Exalted Orb to specifically put on another prefix into our gloves. And we want to do this in the hopes that we end up getting ourselves either tier 2 flat life or tier 2% life. This should be fairly simple to do. It's going to be somewhere around a 1 in 40 to get something half decent. And you're simply just going to want to keep spamming this until you get something decent with the use of Eldritch Exalted Orbs. Realistically, this portion is up to you on how many of these you want to do and on how hard you want to go trying to roll for these. And if you end up getting something like this, where, for example, we got tier 1 evasion rating, tier 4 flat evasion rating, but that we have fire damage attacks, we can use an Eldritch Annul to attempt to remove the roll off of it. And in my opinion, I would keep something like this and just simply craft life onto it to finish up all the prefixes. Again, if this was, instead of flat evasion, was flat life, we would craft in flat evasion, but we just want all 3 of these prefixes. Now comes the hard part. We need to get ourselves perfect spell suppression as a Eldritch Implicit. So this is a little bit convoluted if you've never made a perfect item before. The first thing we're going to want to do is we are going to want to roll for the tier 3 roll of this, and this is going to be done by using Grand Ichors. This shouldn't take you too long to hit, and you'll eventually have yourself a pair of gloves that has 7% spell suppress on it. From here, what we're going to do is we're then going to use 1 exceptional Ember onto the gloves, so we get ourselves a higher tier Searing Exarch roll. The reason we want to do this is because we're going to be using an Orb of Conflict. What this is going to do is it's going to raise one of these to a higher tier while lowering the other one. Now, this is RNG, but it is weighted to upgrading lower tier rolls and lowering high tier rolls. So by us using an exceptional Ember, we have a tier 3 roll. We don't care exactly what it is, but it's now going to give us a little bit better odds of raising the spell suppression and lowering whatever Searing Exarch roll we got. So we're just going to simply click And what could happen is that instead of the spell suppression upgrading, you have an exceedingly small chance of the Searing Exarch roll upgrading and the spell suppression roll downgrading. If this happens, you would simply Orb of Conflict again. The chances of this lowering again are unbelievably small. And if this happens to where this becomes perfect, unfortunate, you got a little bit unlucky. But if we were to just Orb of Conflict it should return back to what it was very quickly. But the point is, we want to make the Eater of Worlds roll exceptional. If we go in game and hold Alt over the gloves, we will see that they have rolls. Instead of using tiers in game, they're called Grand for Tier 4, Exceptional for Tier 3, Exquisite for Tier 2, and Perfect for Tier 1. But instead, we are going to use the tiering system as was in Craft of Exile. But the point is, we want to get ourselves our spell suppression to be Tier 3, while the random Searing Exarch Implicit to be Tier 4. Once this happens, after however many Orbs of Conflict that requires you, you're then going to use another Exceptional Ember to raise the Searing Exarch Implicit back to Tier 3. And again, we don't care about what it rolls. Now that they're both Tier 3, it's just a straight up 50-50 on which one gets upgraded. And we're going to simply be Orb of Conflicting until the spell suppression roll becomes Exquisite or Tier 2. This is going to be a few 50-50s. And if you don't end up winning it on the first one, and for example, you end up losing it and the other Searing Exarch roll becomes upgraded instead, you'd simply just Orb of Conflict again, and you would just keep doing this until it actually happens, and you get your spell suppression roll back up to Tier 2. You can also just get exceptionally unlucky like this and lose so many Orbs of Conflict in a row to where you just lose your spell suppression, at which point you would have to use Grand Icarus again to get spell suppression back on your gloves. But ideally, let's say you didn't get that down lucky and you won the rolls fairly quickly and you got yourself Tier 2 spell suppression on these gloves. I'm getting very unlucky in the showcase doing this. Unfortunately, Orb of Conflicts are a little bit RNG, and as you can see, even in just showcase like this, you can get very unlucky with these. So do be prepared to spend a lot of Orb of Conflicts to get yourself this roll. But point is, we are eventually going to have a pair of gloves that has Tier 2 spell suppression. Is going to be Exquisite, and we're going to have a Grand Searing Exarch roll. The final step here, and the most RNG inducing portion of this, is we are going to use one final Exceptional Ember on these again. So we now have Tier 2 and Tier 3, and we now need to win a Orb of Conflict roll that is weighted against us to make the spell suppression roll perfect. You could get lucky, and this could happen to you on your first roll, and this would be great, but what most likely is going to happen is the spell suppression is going to get downgraded a few times. The random Searing Exarch roll is going to get upgraded a few times. At this point, you simply just have to spam it until something happens to where you don't lose it for a third time in a row in the same showcase. But eventually you're going to get yourself perfect spell suppression. So from this point, finishing up these gloves is going to be very simple. We simply just want to spam Grand Embers until we get attack speed as our Searing Exarch Implicit. Grand Embers are a little bit expensive, but honestly, for how expensive these gloves are in general, I would say a little bit of extra money to get yourself a good attack speed roll isn't asking for a little bit too much, but you can use greater or lesser instead if you're on a little bit of a budget. But in the end, your gloves will look something like this after many Orbs of Conflict failing, which is very painful. And I hate the fact that my guide has to include an item that needs Orbs of Conflict and needs a perfect roll, but hopefully you have a little bit better luck and you don't have to go through 50-60 div worth of Orb of Conflicts to finish up the gloves. Moving on next, let's talk about how to craft yourself a synth amulet for a strength hacker. So this amulet is going to be crafted exactly the same way you craft a synth ring. The process is going to be literally the same. It's just the chances are going to be a little bit worse simply because amulets have so many rolls on them. But the TLDR of this craft is going to be spamming crit multi-essences until we hit Tier 1 strength with an open suffix, augmenting chaos for a guaranteed chaos res roll, and then using exalted orbs to fish for a decent life roll before finishing off the craft with non-channeling. Because synth amulets are super cheap, we wouldn't want to use some sort of fractured amulet on a lower budget. We just immediately want to go for a synth amulet. There are quite a lot of rolls to synth roll. This isn't a static roll like the percent strength rings are. So I would make sure you get yourself a high percent strength roll amulet, and you don't buy yourself a lower percent strength roll amulet because these rolls by themselves are fairly cheap and you should splurge out a little bit more to get yourself a high roll version. But no matter what, we just need to get ourselves an item level 82 or higher amulets. I'm going to use a blue pearl amulet here as an example because it doesn't really matter. It's going to be the same thing, except we just have a different implicit. So the first thing that we want to do is we are going to be spamming scorn essences to guarantee crit multi until we get ourselves strength. This should be about a 1 in 74 chance, but there's a little bit of a caveat here as we need to get these two rolls by themselves with no other suffix. So in the end, your amulets should look something like this. You're going to get yourself the tier 1 strength roll. You're going to have a essence crit multi roll on here, and you might have some sort of random garbage suffix, which you will have to annul off of the amulets before you can go any further. If you annul either the flat strength or the crit multi, you just simply have to spam more essences until you do end up with an amulet that has only the crit multi and the strength roll on it. But once you have yourself an amulet like this, you also need to make sure you have an open prefix, which you most likely will have. The chances of your prefixes and suffixes completely filling are going to be low. But if you do also have 3 filled prefixes on here, you're going to have to annul one of those off as well. And then all we're going to do is simply take this amulet, go to our crafting bench, and craft suffixes cannot be changed. We are then going to take this over to the harvest bench, and we are going to augment chaos. There are 2 chaos rolls available on amulets. You can either get +1 chaos skill gems, which only has an 11% chance of happening, or any of the chaos resistance suffixes, which are all equally weighted. If you want to look at the chance of us getting specifically tier 3 or higher chaos res, it's a 1 in 3 chance, which means you might have to do this a few times. This step is going to be very expensive because augment chaos is going to be very, very expensive. So realistically, if you aren't looking to get a super perfect item, I would settle for tier 3 or higher chaos resistance. I wouldn't go for specifically tier 1 chaos resistance. And if it's a little bit too much out of your price budget, I would only do this once and hope that you get chaos resistance instead of +1 chaos skill gems. But we simply just send the augment chaos. And if we get ourselves a high chaos resistance roll, we're happy and we can move on to the next point of this craft. If you do get yourself a low chaos resistance roll and you're not happy with it, if you get yourself something like tier 5 chaos resistance, for example, what you would do is you would then have to attempt to annul the chaos resistance off of the amulet. If you end up annulling one of your other suffixes, you would have to restart the whole craft. But assuming you can annul the chaos resistance off of the amulet, you'd simply go back to the crafting bench, put suffixes cannot be changed back on the amulet, and do another augment chaos. And you would simply just repeat this until you get a chaos resistance roll that you are happy with. Once we have done all this, we will then go back to the bench, craft suffixes cannot be changed, and scour to remove any prefixes that might be on our amulets. If you don't have any other prefixes, you don't have to do this. And from here, all we're going to do is we're going to take this to a crafting bench, craft flat mana onto it so we can block all the mana mods. And then we're simply going to be using 2 exalted orbs in hopes of us getting a high life roll. If we don't get a high life roll, we're going to take this back to the bench, put suffixes cannot be changed back on the amulets, and just use the scour to remove the prefixes. And then we can just continue this process over and over again until we hit something decent. Now it's going to be about a 1 in 25 chance to hit a decent life roll. I wouldn't go too hard with this, especially if you're not making something that's all tier 1. And in my opinion, I would settle for tier 3 life or higher. I wouldn't go overboard with this as each roll is going to cost you 2 div, and you can use a wild bristle matron to make this a little bit cheaper. But in my opinion, if you can get yourself tier 3 life or more, that should be more than good enough to settle with. Once we have ourselves an amulet with a desired life roll, all we need to do to finish up this craft is simply just bring it to the bench and just simply remove the crafted mana and instead put non-channeling onto our amulet. The final thing to mention here is do make sure you attribute catalyst your amulet, as it will work on the synth % strength roll and it'll work on the flat roll that we rolled for. Up next, let's talk about how to make a Simplex Amulet. Now, these are going to be excessively expensive, and this is going to be something most people are not going to craft simply because the base itself is very expensive. But ideally, what we're going to want to upgrade the amulet to is going to be a Simplex Amulet with flat strength, % strength, and non-channeling skills on it. These are unbelievably easy to craft. The only difficulty here is buying the base itself, which is typically hovering around half a mirror or so, simply because they are super rare and they only come out of heist. The special thing about Simplex, and the reason we want to use a Simplex, is because it will give us 100% increased modifier magnitudes on whatever we put on here. The only downside being that we can only have 1 prefix and 2 suffixes on this amulet, which is completely fine. We can still make a very strong amulet with just those stats. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to buy ourselves a Simplex Amulet. Now, in the notes section of this about the building, there will be a link to bring you over to Simplexes that you can purchase. Now, I want to mention one very important thing about purchasing simplexes. Some people are going to list them in mirror value, and some people are going to list them in divs. Make sure you don't get yourself scammed, and make sure to check 1, what is the value of a mirror? And what is the value of, for example, 0.6 mirrors? And 2, come over to the filters and swap it from Chaos Orb equivalent to specifically Chaos Orbs and Divine Orbs, and see if you can find yourself a cheaper simplex here than the ones listed for mirror. What I'm trying to say here is don't get yourself scammed and pay more for one of these bases than you have to. The only thing you have to keep in mind is you want to make sure you buy yourself an 83 or higher item level amulet, which most of these should be 83 or higher. The other thing to mention here is make sure you do not buy yourself a double influenced amulet. For example, this one is Shaper and Warlord. Do not buy these. These are a brick and they're going to make hitting the rolls that we want substantially harder. The filter in the trade link in the notes section is specifically set up to filter for 1 influence, and it does not matter which influence you buy. Simply because, for example, if you were to buy this Shaper one, we can then go over to the Hoarded Crafting Station and just use random influence to make this a Warlord influence amulet. If you end up buying yourself an amulet that does not have an influence on it, which most of these will do, all you have to do is simply just use a Warlord's Exalted Orb on the amulet to give it Warlord influence. So the crafting methodology on these is going to be very, very simple, and there's really nothing to talk about. All you're going to do is you're just going to simply use Deafening Essences of Rage until you hit Tier 1 Warlord percent strength. This should be on average about a 1 in 400 chance to do. It's not a pretty chance, but it's the only thing we could do to get these two mods together. And you need to make sure you have an open prefix. Now, the chances of you having an open prefix are very low. You're most likely going to have to null whatever prefix is on these amulets to get yourself an open prefix to be able to craft non-channeling. There's nothing I need to show you here in terms of crafting. You're just simply clicking your essences until you hit the 2 strength rolls, and then you either hope that you have an open prefix or that you annul and win the annul. These are very expensive, but realistically, the crafting costs are pennies in comparison to the cost of the base itself. Up next, let's talk about how to craft the claw for this build. So first, we're going to go over how to craft the cheap claw. The cheap claw is going to be very simple. We want to use an Imperial Claw base that is going to have attack speed fractured onto it. We are then going to use Deafening Essences of Woe to guarantee spell damage, and we are going to roll with them until we hit Flat Chaos. After we get Flat Chaos, we are then going to do Prefixes cannot be changed and use a Veiled Chaos Orb to hope we get the Weapons Penetrate Chaos Resistance roll, followed up by a Prefixes cannot be changed, Augment Crits in hopes that we win the 50-50 for crit multi, and finishing it up with a Crit Chance and Strength int Hybrid Craft. Now, there are going to be quite a lot of things that you can get as a fractured mod on here, but in my opinion, the only one you should ever consider is going to be fractured attack speed. You can live with a lower crit multi roll if you don't win the crit multi roll at the end of the craft, but in my opinion, playing this build without tier 1 attack speed is going to feel like complete garbage. The item level of this claw doesn't matter, as you need minimum level 77 for tier 1 attack speed, and that is going to be high enough of an item level for all other mods. So just get yourself the cheapest attack speed roll, and I would really not cheap out on this, and make sure you get yourself as close as you can to a maximum attack speed fracture. So in terms of what we're going to be doing, it's going to be very simple. We're simply going to be using Deafening Essence of Woe, which are going to give us spell damage, which we want because we're turning that into attack damage through Balmage's Cry, until we hit the flat chaos damage roll. Now, there's only one tier of this, so as soon as you hit it, you're done. It's about a 1 in 121 chance to hit. Eventually, you're going to have yourself a claw that looks something like this. You're going to have our flat chaos damage roll on here, and then we're going to have Essence of Woe spell damage on our claw. So we'll have 2 prefixes and our fractured suffix. Now, if you do end up getting yourself a random garbage prefix, something like this, you will have to annul said prefix off. You need clean prefixes. You're also going to need a clean suffix. So if you somehow get yourself a claw that is filled on prefixes and suffixes, which is very rare to happen, you will need to annul for both, but no matter what, you need an open prefix and open suffix. What you're then going to do is you are going to take this claw and you're going to go over to the crafting bench and you're going to put prefixes cannot be changed on it. Now, if you have clean suffix like this, you don't have to do this, but you're most likely going to have a random garbage suffix on here. So we need to do prefixes cannot be changed scour to have clean suffixes to be able to do the rest of this. Now, what we are going to do from here is we're going to take this claw over to the crafting bench and we're going to put prefixes cannot be changed onto the claw. After this, we're then going to use a Veiled Chaos Orb, and this is going to either give us a Veiled Suffix or Veiled Prefix. There's absolutely nothing we could do to influence this, as Veiled Chaos Orbs will respect prefixes, suffixes cannot be changed. We'll still end up rerolling your suffixes and then adding a mod onto it, which means that we cannot guarantee a veiled prefix here. So I'm trying to say is that this will be a 50-50. You're either going to get yourself a veiled suffix or you're going to get yourselves a veiled prefix. Now, one case that might happen here is something like this, where you get yourself a veiled suffix and your prefix ends up filling up. Now, if this happens, you will have to attempt to annul the prefix off of here, as we need to have that prefix open. If you end up annulling either your spell damage or your flat chaos, you will have to start the craft over again and roll the 2 mods from scratch. Now, if you end up getting a veiled suffix, what you'll have to do is you will have to put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw and try again. If you end up getting super unlucky to where you get both a veiled suffix and you end up getting some random garbage suffix like this to where your suffixes are full, you will have to annul in this case as well, in the hopes that you annul one of the suffixes off to be able to try again, as we just need to simply put prefixes cannot be changed and we need to attempt to veil Chaos Orb one more time. The point is, you're going to have to keep doing this until you end up getting yourself a veiled prefix. Once you have a veiled prefix, we are simply just going to unveil. Because our prefixes are completely full, there is no way for us to influence this prefix unveil, and we just simply have to pray that we win the 50% chance and we get weapons with this attack penetrate chaos resistance. This is going to be a very high chance, but on average, it's going to take you about 4 attempts to do this because you need to win a 50-50 for the veiled mod to become a prefix and not a suffix. And then you need to win a 50-50 when unveiling, as the total weighting of the chaos penetration roll is about 50%. But the point is, eventually you should end up with a claw that looks something like this. We're going to have the 3 prefixes that we want, as well as fracture attack speed. From this point, finishing the claw is going to be relatively simple. All we need to do is go back to the bench and put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw. We're then going to take this claw over to Harvest Bench and we are going to augment critical. Now, this is going to either give you critical strike chance or critical strike multiplier. This is just a raw 50-50. And if you end up getting critical strike chance like this, you simply would just put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw, scour the claw, so you lose the critical strike chance, put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw, and try again. You need to keep doing this until you get a critical strike multiplier roll. We do not want critical strike chance because we specifically need to finish the craft with the int and strength hybrid, because not only is that better, but we need that intelligence to actually be able to fit all the intelligence that we need in this build. This 24 intelligence is highly crucial to the build. So assuming you win the 50-50 and you get yourself critical strike multiplier, which will take a few times, you're simply going to settle for whatever you get. If you want to make yourself a absolutely perfect claw, you would keep doing this over and over again, because you can basically sit here and do this over and over again with nothing stopping you until you get yourself tier 1 crit multi. The waiting on all the crit multis are equal to each other, so the chances of you getting tier 1 crit multi by doing this is a 1 in 12. It's up to you if you feel like doing this 12 times on average to hit tier 1 crit multi, but realistically, I would just settle with whatever crit multi you get. You can always come back to this and fix this up later in the future, because our prefixes cannot be touched and we are putting a crafted mod on this, so you can always just remove the crafted mod, put prefixes cannot be changed, scour, and try again. But once we have ourselves a claw tier that we're happy with, all we're going to do is simply just take it to the crafting bench one final time, and we are going to craft the strength and int increased critical strike chance hybrid. The final thing you want to do once you finish up your claw is to simply just come to harvest bench one more time and put the weapon enchant on it that gives you increased attack speed per quality, as we don't care about the increased physical damage that gives us, as we don't even do physical damage due to replica Alberon's warpath. And then finally, let's talk about how to make a synth claw. Now, before we go any further, I want to mention that making this claw is very expensive, and you can expect this to cost several hundred div at a minimum. You do not need this claw until you specifically have yourself an original sin, as the synth implicit that gives us fire damage to attacks per 10 strength literally does not work due to replica Alberon's warpath, making us do no non-chaos damage until original sin can convert that fire damage over to chaos damage, at which point the synth implicit becomes useful. This will be a very big DPS upgrade for your build, but again, you do not need this until you have original sin, and original sin is not very good until you actually get yourself this claw. So first, we need to talk about the base. Now, the base here doesn't really matter in terms of using bad ones. For example, a nailed fist is literally just as good as an eye gouger or an imperial claw, as we don't care about the physical damage that much. It's very irrelevant. All we care about is finding specifically a synth claw that has the fire damage attacks on it. The other thing to mention about this is we need to find a good base. There are two different types of claw bases that exist. First, we have the claw bases that have 6.5% crit chance, as we can see on the Vol Claw, with 1.3% APS. Next, we have the 6.3% crit chance with 1.5 APS claws. And then finally, we have the 6% crit chance with 1.6 APS. In my opinion, I would specifically go for a 6% crit chance, 1.6 APS claw. Again, there's quite a few of these. You don't need to specifically get an Imperial Claw. For example, a Sparking Claw would be more than good enough, or a Cat's Paw is more than good enough. But in my opinion, I feel like getting specifically 1.6 APS is very important. You can potentially go for one of these hybrids that's 6.3, 1.55 if you can find them, but these are very expensive, as these bases are going to be in high demand. Realistically, do some window shopping and think about what is needed for you specifically in terms of which base you want. But whichever claw you buy, the crafting methodology is going to be the same. You're simply just going to have to think, do you want more attack speed or do you want more crit chance? Either way, let's start talking about the claw itself. So I'm just going to use a default Imperial Claw here to stimulate our Synth Claw. Crafting this is going to be kind of similar to how we crafted the non-Synth Claw, except it's going to be substantially more RNG in terms of finishing the claw. So we are going to once again use Deafening Essences of Woe to guarantee spell damage, but instead of going for flat chaos damage, we are now going to be rolling for lightning damage. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that rolling for tier 1 lightning damage is excessively difficult, as the weighting of it is basically negative. On top of that, crafting the suffixes for this claw are going to be very expensive. So what I would recommend is to just settle for tier 3 or higher lightning damage. In reality, this build is going to have so much flat damage that the difference between tier 3 and tier 1 lightning damage is going to be about 1% more DPS, while at the same time being substantially easier to hit tier 3 or higher lightning damage. You can go for tier 1 if you really want to make a perfect claw, but I would recommend tier 3 to be more than good enough, especially since it's just a 1 in 32 chance of seeing this. So we're just going to simply be spamming our claw until we hit at least tier 3 or higher lightning damage with the Essence of Woe increased spell damage roll on it. Now, if you do get a random garbage prefix on here, for example like this, you will have to annul the random prefix. If you end up annulling the flat lightning damage or the spell damage, you will have to start again, but you simply just need to get yourself a claw that has one open prefix and at least one open suffix. From this point, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this over to the crafting bench and we're going to be crafting onto it prefixes cannot be changed. We are then going to be using a veiled chaos orb and it's going to be a 50-50 if it either gives you a prefix or a suffix, and we cannot influence this in any way at all. Now, if you end up getting yourself something like this, where you get yourself a veiled suffix, and your prefixes end up getting filled, you will have to attempt to annul the random prefix that gets added. The chances of this happening are very small, so you don't have to worry about this too often. Realistically, we're going to mostly have to worry about, instead of getting yourself a veiled prefix, you can get yourself a veiled suffix. Now, this is the other case that might happen, to where you get a veiled suffix and you fill up the suffixes with garbage mods as well, to where you can't clear off the suffixes. If this happens, you will have to annul again and pray you don't hit one of your prefixes, but if you do, you will have to roll with essences once again to get your prefixes back. And if we do end up getting to this case where we do end up getting a veiled suffix, no matter what else other suffixes you get on here, all we would do is just simply put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw. We don't even care to unveil this as it doesn't matter to us. I just simply veiled chaos orb again. And we simply just need to keep doing this until we end up getting ourselves a claw that doesn't have full suffixes. In this case, you'd have to null, and it has a veiled prefix. Once we do get ourselves a veiled prefix, we will unveil. There is simply nothing we could do to influence this roll. We just simply have to win the 50% chance of seeing chaos resistance penetrate. And as soon as we get this, we can move on with the rest of the claw. If you do end up getting yourself a claw like this, where you also fill up your suffixes, you will have to YOLO annul at this point and pray you remove a suffix. But ideally, you should get yourself a claw that doesn't have full suffixes. And no matter what, whatever happens, once you do have yourself an open suffix, you'll put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw and scour to get yourself a claw that only has the 3 prefixes that we want. From this point on, we effectively hit a checkpoint to where we can never lose our prefixes, but we are about to enter the portion of this that is going to be very expensive. So what we now need to do on this claw is we need to get ourselves tier 1 attack speed, and we need to get ourselves tier 1 crit multi. What we're going to first start off with is going to be the crit multi, because it's going to be substantially harder to actually hit that. What we want to do from here is put prefixes cannot be changed back onto our claw, and then we're going to go over to the crafting bench, and we are going to augment critical. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to give us a 50-50 chance on it either augmenting crit chance or augmenting crit multi. We do not want to augment crit chance, and if this happens, that is a brick and we'll have to start our suffixes over again, because we need to specifically end the craft by putting the hybrid strength and increased critical strike chance roll, as we absolutely need that intelligence to be able to get all the intelligence we need in this build. And the strength crit chance hybrid is better than a higher crit chance roll. So we are going to do the 50-50 on praying that this is going to give us crit multi instead of crit chance. And if you end up getting crit chance like this, you will have to do prefixes cannot be changed, scour, prefixes cannot be changed once more, and try the augment again. And you're going to keep doing this until you hit crit multi. Now comes the hard part. You're now going to put prefixes cannot be changed back onto the claw one more time. And now you're going to do add remove speed. What we need to happen here is 1, we need to win the 50-50 that the prefixes cannot be changed will be removed. And 2, win a attack speed roll, as there are going to be 8 different tiers of attack speed. And you could play with a low attack speed roll, but in my opinion, I would say you would need a tier 5 or tier 4 attack speed roll or higher. So we just add remove speed and we pray that the crit multi does not get eaten. If this happens, what you can do from this point is you can now augment crit and pray that you win the 50-50 and get crit multi instead, and the attack speed doesn't get eaten, assuming you're okay with the attack speed roll. In this case, we got tier 7, so I would just scour and I would just start from scratch again, where I put prefixes cannot be changed and augment critical in hopes that we get crit multi. But if you do end up getting yourself a decent attack speed roll that you like, you can then try the add remove crits to hope to get crit multi. In this case, if the attack speed didn't get eaten and you end up getting crit chance, you would have to put suffixes cannot be changed and scour. But the point is, you want to swap between augment crit and augment attack speed until you get yourself a claw that has some sort of attack speed roll on it and some sort of crit multi roll on it. I would not recommend to attempt too many augment crits when you have yourself an attack speed roll, unless it's like tier 2 or tier 1 attack speed, because it's going to be substantially more expensive to do because you need to also win the 50-50. If you just get yourself a non-okay attack speed roll like this, like tier 4, I would just scour and start with the crits first. So once you've been through the grueling gauntlet of attempting to add remove suffixes, once we finally have a claw that looks like this, we just simply finish off the craft by bringing it over to the crafting bench and crafting ourselves the strength int and crit chance hybrid. And then finally go over to harvest bench and then just simply crafting the attack speed per 8% quality enchant, as we don't care about it increasing the physical damage of the weapon. We instead just want more attack speed. In the end, as I mentioned, this craft is going to be unbelievably expensive and it's going to take quite a lot to finish up the suffixes. And this is going to cost you several hundred div to actually finish. But if you can make yourself one of these claws, congratulations, you have made yourself a very, very endgame item, and it's an item to covet and treasure forever. And that's all we have to talk about in this crafting video. If you have any questions on any of the items that we discussed, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. Or you can come by my stream and ask me any questions you have there. Or if you simply just want to come hang out with the cuties, I'll be more than happy to see you there. Other than that, I hope you cuties enjoy, and I'll see you cuties in the next video.